Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast brought to you by BetMGM. This is the Group of Five Deep Dive. And a reminder to our audience, you can follow us over on the Action app as well. That's BBOC G5 Deep Dive throughout the season upcoming. We'll get into our futures plays, our win totals, every single pick starting in week 0. But today is a special day for Ianello and myself because this is our NFL draft special, or as we like to call it, graduation day for our G5 kids, the darling G5 superstars who have worked their way through the combine, through the entire offseason. They're going to hear their names probably in day 2, day 3 of this upcoming draft. But it's a very exciting moment for us because we had been there from the beginning, real OGs with a lot of these guys. I know, how is the offseason treating you, and how do you feel about the upcoming NFL draft?
It's good. Yeah. I'm deep in the baseball weeds right now, but I love the draft. Well, let's put it this way. I love draft day and I despise everything leading up to the draft. I'm one of those people that my blood boils listening to NFL experts be like, "Oh, did you see the way Will Levis threw the ball with no defense?" Like, yeah, but when there's defense, he sucks at football. But the other thing we wanted to do here is because our guys don't get love. The guys we talk about all year, the NFL experts don't, they're not sitting there breaking down, Memphis and Houston tape. So I think that's kind of what we wanted to do and come in here and be like, hey, don't forget about the little guy. But like you said, it does feel like graduation day. I always feel like a proud papa. I get tear. I've watched the Bailey Zappi video of Bill Belichick calling him, telling he's gonna get drafted, and boy, do I well up like my child just got picked in the draft just like his dad did. So that's kind of how I feel about these kind of NFL drafts.
To respond to a few of those points, I'll start with the Will Levis hype train.
He stinks, dude. He's so bad.
Just at this point, the whole showing people working out in shorts elements, and he hit the ceiling. It's like, is that even good? Is it good to throw a deep ball that high so the defense has that much time to adjust to it? It would be like watching the long range champions for like driving contests and then be like, that guy's going to win the Masters. No, he's not. That's not like that's a tiny element of your game, just being able to hit the ball really far, just being able to throw the ball really far. And I've basically had it. At this, it seems as though someone's
Uh,
going to reach and take Levis in the top 10, and my head's going to explode.
my favorite was everyone going bananas because Anthony Richardson had like the biggest high jump ever for a quarterback. It's like great for the once a season where the center snaps the ball 15 feet over his head, he might get a finger on it. Move him up the draft board. It's like,
Yeah,
well,
unlike
why is
unlike
jumping
NFL
high a
Blitz,
useful skill for a quarterback
unlike
ever?
NFL Blitz, you don't throw a lot of jump passes. I know Mahomes every once in a while will throw a jump pass, but it's like it's not in your regular repertoire as a quarterback. But
So
the
dumb.
other element you brought up is that these are the rough cut gems. We have to like dig deep for them, but these guys deserve their love. And unfortunately, this podcast is going to be one of the few that get into it because there's a good chance that we have no G5 players selected in the first round of the draft, which would be the first time since 1989. That's when both Sanders, Barry, and Dion went in the top 5. So it's been forever. And when you look at some of the drafts coming out, the mock drafts from those recruitniks that you talked about earlier, Mel Kiper, CBS, The Athletic, no G5 guys in the first 2 rounds. There's a couple FCS guys floating around, but there's a decent chance that there's no group of 5 players selected in the first 2 rounds. That's wild to me, given some of the skill position players that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so you kind of stole my thunder because I told you beforehand, since we don't have a lot to talk about because we're kind of going to focus on the first 2 rounds today. We don't have a ton to talk about. I was going to try to kill some time by asking you a trivia question, which was, the last time a group of 5 players did not go in the first round. But I'm curious because there was some great throwback names. So I don't want to take too long doing this. So, our producer, Matt Mitchell, doesn't, shoot himself listening to us ramble on about the past. I'm curious, like, how many guys you can go and like name of like the G5 guys. Because when I was looking through and I was trying to find I actually went through like draft by draft. And I was like, oh, forgot about him, forgot about him. I mean, 2022 should be the easiest. There were 2 G5 guys taken. Do you remember them?
See, I like on a yearly basis, it's not great unless you like team me up with the teams because like so much of the draft, like just like
The college team?
the pro team. Even if you just give me the pro team, or certainly the college team would help. Why don't you throw?
I'll do the college team because I have that written down. Cincinnati and Tulsa.
All right, so Zaven Collins, Arizona. Did you go to the Cardinals? Was that right?
That was 2021.
Oh, that's 2021. Okay. So who'd the Cardinals take last year? Or were they not in the G5
Yeah,
sweepstakes last season?
I
All
don't
right,
think.
just lay him on me.
Well, Cincinnati should be that was Sauce Gardner.
Right.
And then Tyler Smith from Tulsa went in the first round. 2021, Zach Wilson, Zaven Collins, and Peyton Turner. Remember, he was like the surprise late pick from Houston. 2020, my boy Jordan Love, QB1, shout out. 2019, Ed Oliver, Houston. He was like top 5, wasn't he?
He was ninth pick, I want to say. He was
Yeah,
definitely top
he
10.
was up there. 2018 was a big year. Josh Allen, Marcus Davenport from UTSA, Lander Vander Esch from Boise State, Rashad Penny from San Diego State, and Mike Hughes from UCF. 2017 was Corey Davis went like 4th overall at Western Michigan. And then it starts to get a little weak. 2016, William Jackson, Houston, Paxton Lynch from Memphis, the rough pick there. Vernon Butler, La Tech. 2015, Brashad Perriman and Byron Jones. We'll kind of stop there. 2014, obviously, was Blake Bortles. Did he go third or fourth?
I mean, took them to the AFC title game.
True.
The Bortle ship was
20,
along there.
2013 was Eric Fisher going number 1 overall. Shout out Central Michigan. But yeah, like you said, it's been a long time. McShay doesn't have anyone in the top 2 rounds. Daniel Jeremiah doesn't have any. I would say I probably respect Jeremiah the most of any mock drafter, him and like Peter Schrager. And Jeremiah doesn't have any G5 guys ranked in his top 50. So yeah, it's gonna be a tough year for us.
Let's transition here. I think this is a good moment because you do have to squint a little bit to feel good about a player coming off the board in the first 2 rounds. But I'm going to go ahead and get it started with Tyjae Spears. In terms of his tape, when you combine that with his measurables and also his production, he certainly should be in the conversation to be the 3rd running back taken. So it's going to be Bijan. It's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama. And then you look at him. He's 5'10", 200 pounds, ran a 4.48 40-yard dash. But on the production side, almost 1,600 yards rushing, 21 total TDs, 10 TDs in his last 4 games. If he played USC every week, he would have won the Heisman Trophy. Next Gen NFL Stats ranked him as the 3rd best player at the position of running back at the Combine. So he's right there. In terms of the market, he's 100 to 1 to be the first running back taken. That's not going to happen. It's probably going to be Bijan. 35 to 1 to mix it up and hop Gibbs. I don't think that's going to happen either. But there's plenty of teams that have running back needs that I think it's reasonable to see them taking Spears in the 2nd round or early in the 3rd. You got Cowboys, Texans, Dolphins, Eagles, Bills, Falcons. All of these teams could use someone like him to come in. And the fact that he caught north of 20 balls last year, he looked very comfortable in the passing game. I think that gives him plenty of versatility as a 3rd down back, but also he was the go-to bell cow for the Green Wave. So there's no reason in my mind that he couldn't be a starting running back in the NFL, which should put him in a conversation. So the teams that I listed, that's where, from a live bet perspective, depending on which state you're operating in, there's live bets for the NFL draft. If the Cowboys are coming up, no Zeke, the Texans running back room is still really weak. The Eagles at this point, with Miles Sanders gone, they need to go ahead and fill that role as well. So these are all different pieces that I think could play in Spears' favor. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, so I'm similar to you. Obviously, we both live in Pennsylvania. I actually just moved, so now we literally live like 10 minutes apart. Still have not met in person yet, so we will do that. We will share many tales of our favorite Maction stars over beers very soon. I love Tyjae Spears. I agree with you. He made us a ton of money last year. The biggest thing I like about Tyjae is, he kind of exploded on the scene. He tore his ACL in 2020. And if you look at his 2021 stats, first of all, Tulane was trash. So that kind of hurt him. He finished with, 800 yards. But even last season, you look the first couple of games, 57 yards against UMass, like 8 yards against Alcorn State, 26 against Kansas State. And then, he still was kind of finding his footing back in, struggled against Houston. But then you look towards the end of the year, 151, 126, 157, 130. The way he finished the year in the biggest games of the year, 101 against Cincinnati, 199 against UCF, 205 and 4 scores against USC, as you mentioned. So I just love the fact that he kind of continued to get better every year or every week. He's not the biggest back, which I guess is probably the concern. He's small. He's not powerful. Obviously, you and me probably watch more Tulane games than most people. He definitely struggles at times to get through the line of scrimmage. Through the first quarter, he'll have 8 carries for like 9 yards. You're kind of like, what's going on? But when he gets into the secondary, he's gone. He was 5th in the country. He had over 1,000 yards after contact, which for a guy his size is remarkable because that's basically how he was all year. He either got tackled immediately, or if he was able to break through a linebacker, he scored. That was just how his game was. He's super explosive. He's awesome at like changing direction, quick cuts. For me, the one downside is that size, is he's not big enough. I don't know that he's big enough to be in every down, first and first and goal, ramming up the middle. So I do think he's likely a third round pick. So the way I would bet it is, assuming he doesn't get drafted in the first, or, I mean, second round pick or third, is you kind of, like you said, the live betting. I think once, you know, what's his face, Bijan and Gibbs are gone, if I don't think Gibbs sneaks in the first round, but if he does, that would be ideal because then you get all overnight to bet, to let more props come out, and then you bet him to be the next running back taken. You take a shot that he goes third. I mean, it's really going to be like him, who A-Chain and Charbonnet are kind of those other guys in the mix, which, like, I don't know, A-Chain's really small too. I like Charbonnet personally, but so maybe you do it. Maybe after Charbonnet, if Charbonnet goes third, you live bet Tajay to be the fourth round, the fourth back taken. You can kind of play it that way. You mentioned landing spots because to me he's not big enough to be like a power back.
Mm-hmm.
And he has good hands, but he didn't catch the ball a ton in that Tulane offense, as much as you'd be like, oh, he's going to be a Kenneth Gainwell type back. To me, he's perfect as a change of pace back in a rotation. So when I was looking yesterday at some, possible landing spots, to me, the two that jumped out was New England. You pair him with Ramondre Stevenson, big, powerful. He gets the goal line backs. You give him a break. And New England loves rotating. You think about the Deion Lewis's, the Kevin Fox. You kind of rotate him with New England. The other one that kind of jumped out at me was Arizona, because you have James Conner, who's more of the bigger back too, but has a ton of injury history. So you kind of have Tajay to be that kind of, secondary backup for James Conner. Like, those are two spots that jumped out at me. New England loves taking running backs, and especially the G5 kind of guys in the mid rounds. So that would be a spot I would be looking, is to bet, New England maybe, or just kind of bet him to be the next back taken after either the first two, or maybe you let the third one go and then bet him to be the next one. That's kind of how I would approach Tajay.
Yeah, Arizona is interesting because I do think there's certainly that need in the running back room. Unfortunately, their roster in general is kind of a mess. So it does remain, the running back position, kind of a luxury position, even in teams where they need a true number one starter. Most teams in the NFL have now gotten comfortable with that running back by committee. They want to play situational football. So do they value all the other positions on their need board above, running back? So I agree, though, if Gibbs can sneak into the end of that first round, I think that's great news for Spears potentially coming off the board in the second round.
Yeah.
Let's transition now to another skill position, and that's wide receiver. I think this draft has a lot of potential sleepers in it. And one that I was surprised, given how well he performed at the Senior Bowl, and then when you look at his production last year at Houston, Tank Dell. I mean, the guy was an absolute monster. He ran his 40-yard dash, 4.49, which in my opinion is slower than how he played on the field. He's 5'8", 165 pounds. Thank goodness he's playing in the NFL in 2023 and not 1998, because he probably wouldn't have got drafted at all at 165 pounds. But when you flash on the tape and then look at the production, 109 catches, 1,400 yards, 17 TDs. Next Gen NFL ranked him as the fourth wide receiver at the combine in terms of the production versus the measurable combination. And even the odds for, he's not going to be the first wide receiver taken. He's 200 to 1, 100 to 1 to be the second. But after that, I think this part of the draft gets really fluid. The Athletic has him in the third round. CBS has him in the fourth round. But there's a bunch of wide receiver rooms in the NFL that are really thin right now, that I think he moves in and he's either a number 2 or certainly a number 3, kind of like a gadget slot guy right away. Look at the Bears. They need more help for Justin Fields. The Ravens, yeah, I know they just paid $15 million for OBJ, but how many games is he going to play? And they had multiple, needs at the wide receiver position. Patriots, Texans, Titans, all of these AFC teams I see as a potential landing spot for him. And then also a team I'm going to throw out there, if I can get a live number on it. And as you said, it depends how aggressive books get between rounds, between the first and second round in particular, and when they get into day 3. I think the Bills could really use somebody like this, because the Bills offense, for all of Josh Allen's heroics, they seem to struggle a little bit hitting the big play down the stretch. And I think it was more of a grind. This is a guy you can throw a bubble screen to and he can take it to the house. This is somebody who's an incredible yards after reception kind of player, yards after catch. So I don't hate that marriage. And if I can get an exacta where I've put the Bills and Tank together, I like that play. This is a team we talked a ton about. They ended up coming below expectations last year, but he really made Clayton Tune look great. And for me, Tune's kind of an up and down player, but I think if he ends up getting drafted in the 4th or 5th round as a quarterback, he really has Tank to thank for it, because this guy just made him look incredible with taking some of those short throws to the house.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot, when we do the kind of later gems round, because that's all my feelings on, Clayton Tune is I'm not as high on him because I'm so high on Tank Dell. And like you said, it's kind of similar to Tajay, I guess, which like he's so small. I was looking yesterday, I think I saw someone that said there's not a single receiver in the NFL or starting receiver that's less than 175 pounds, and Dell's 165. So it's like he's got to do some bulking up. He's super fast. Like he is much faster than that number F40 time. That's one of those things. Again, that's why I hate the combine. It's like just watch him play, and he is. It's not that he's fast too, because I mean he is, but he's so quick. His change of direction is off the charts. He's an elite route runner, in my opinion. He's mentioned the yards after catch, and as you said, he's small, but like who cares? It's not even legal to hit receivers anymore. It's not like he's not great at catching the ball in traffic, but like if he doesn't have to catch, he just has to get near a guy and it's pass interference. So who cares? He played both inside and outside of Houston, which I think actually helps him because he's probably more of a slot guy in the NFL, you would think, just with his size. At the end of the day, he can just flat out get open. Like he kind of reminds me of that, obviously way smaller, but like he's kind of like Devontae Adams, where like he just gets open. Like he just runs these routes and he just shakes guys. He could run, if he runs a hook, he's open. If he runs by a guy, he's open. Like he just always is open, which I love about him. This is kind of a weird draft because you mentioned it when I was doing my research for this too. I did, you pull up CBS, ESPN, The Athletic, you just look at all the different sites, and the wide receiver rankings was bananas, like different. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen it like this drastically. I mean, everyone kind of has, you have Smith and Jigba, Addison, and Quentin Johnson are kind of the first three. And then there's that second tier that's kind of like the Zay Jones, Josh Downs, or Zay Flowers, Josh Downs kind of tier. And then after that, I mean, I saw people that had Dell ranked 5th and people that had Dell ranked 15th. It's like insane. Because there was another guy when we talked about the G5 guys, you know, half of them had Dell ranked as the top G5 receiver. Well, the other half had Rashee Rice. And that's the guy I want to touch on because I'm a massive Rashee Rice fan. And I also am incredibly frustrated by Rashee Rice at times, mostly because I watched a lot of SMU games. And similar to Dell, he was their entire offense. He had like 38% of their receiving yards. And basically, whenever I bet on SMU, he made a big play to help me win. And whenever I bet against him, I was screaming at the defense to triple team him. Unlike Dell, he's a super inconsistent route runner. He's kind of choppy, and he almost, like, this is just my opinion. He almost seemed like he got frustrated that he was the only player on their offense that could do something. Like he'd make 5 sick plays on like in consecutive plays, and then he just stopped trying. Like he was infuriating at times because when he's at his best and he looks like he's giving 100%. He's big, he's long, he's fast, he can jump, out the roof. He has great ball skills, elite body control. He's great at catching the deep ball. He just kind of stops trying for times and he's like jogging. You're like, what are you doing, dude? My biggest concern about him is he reminds me so much coming out of college of Jalen Tolbert, who I loved. But Tolbert couldn't get on the field against the Cowboys with the Cowboys this year. So that's kind of like my comp in like a good way because I love, big, strong, can beat you deep ball threat. But like, I still don't know why Tolbert couldn't get on the field with Dallas personally because I was high on him. So I guess the fact that Tolbert, was basically just a practice squad guy kind of makes me nervous about Rice. But what are your feelings on Rice? Like I said, I think when he's at his best, he's a very good player. It's just you got to get him to like try.
Well, two things. First, I agree. There's zero consensus on this draft class at wide receiver. It's all over the place. I actually saw a mock draft that had Tyler Scott from
I was
Cincinnati.
going to bring that up too. I was going to bring that up next.
Second
It's like
round.
he ran a 4.3.
And that's the thing that's crazy. It's like Tank Dell, if he had run a 4.35, his comp would have been Deshaun Jackson in terms of collegiate production, hitting the home run, and then being undersized, being truly under 5'10 and really slight. The only one that's gone on to serious multi-year success in the NFL at that size is Deshaun Jackson. I think he could have worked his way into the second round if he had just run a 4.35. It just puts such incredible pressure on an event that is not truly football related. It's workout related. And just flip on the tape. He was that fast on the tape all the time.
You we'll talk about him next pod too, but you mentioned the same thing about Puka Nacua. It's like, oh, you ran about. It's like, watch him play football. He's faster than everyone on the field.
Yeah, Puka Nacua, he probably would have been in this conversation if he could stop getting hurt. And that's the hardest thing, I think, from a talent evaluator perspective. It's like, how much is a fluky injury? How much are you playing through other injuries and get injured again because he needed to be on the field to help that BYU offense? Like, those are the kind of questions that we're not privy to the answers, because a lot of that takes place in the offseason vetting where they're talking to coaching staffs, they're talking to trainers, they're having the in-depth meetings. So it's interesting too, if you're looking for an exact marriage between player and team, you can go through and Google how many in-depth meetings, because they're capped by the NFL. They have like the combine where they have, quicker interview sessions, but they can have these in-depth conversations. And, the fact that Scott was interviewed, he had formal interviews with the Browns, Giants, Raiders, and Bears. I just like circle that.
He is a Raider through 4.3. Check.
Yep, exactly. So it's like
while we're talking about it, we're kind of
shocked to see the Raiders pull the trigger there.
Since we're kind of jumping around here, which is fine. The thing I kind of dug into Tyler Scott. I saw his name. I'm like, what? Tyler Scott? He had like 9 touchdowns all year. Granted, he didn't have great quarterback play, but to me, I think the reason Tyler Scott is getting love is he ran the 4.3, and like the case I would make for him is he was a running back in high school. He's insanely fast. He does have good hands. He's also 5'9", so he's small like Dell. The difference is he's not a great route runner. He got bumped off his routes a lot. He really struggled getting through a release and pressure, which to me is, you can't coach speed and hands. You can coach route running, which is kind of his biggest issue. When you look at him, he's basically only played receiver for 2 years. He was a running back in high school. He redshirted his freshman year. His sophomore year, he was the number 2 behind Alec Pierce and was, fine, but they had Pierce. They ran the ball a ton with Jerome Ford. And then last year was like kind of his first year being the guy. So he's still super raw. So I wouldn't be shocked if a team's like, he's played receiver for 2 years and he's wicked fast. We could teach him the rest. So I do think a team, like I said, he's just the Raiders are going to be like, oh, we could teach him to play better. We just got to get the speed guy. So I was a little surprised to see Tyler Scott's name. I don't even know. You can make a Trey Tucker was just a good receiver as he was. But so that surprised me a little bit. But I could see the logic behind a fast guy who's still super raw. But like you said, I think Dell and Rice should both go ahead of Scott personally.
Before we get into some defensive guys that we like, I'm going to throw out a player that I think is going to be a surprise in terms of where he's drafted. I'm not sure if he can get into the top of the third round, but I think there's a chance that he sneaks in at the bottom half of the third round. And from a measurables perspective, this is usually where there's a gulf between the Power 5 guys and the G5 guys. It's like there's the Tank Dells of the world where if he was 6 feet tall, he'd be a first-round pick, but he doesn't have all those measurables. Not the case with Zach Kuntz. 6'7", 255, 4.55 40-yard dash. Like, that's just incredible in terms of his overall physicality. In terms of his athleticism score, Next Gen NFL ranked him first at the combine for tight ends. And when you looked at his full year production in 2022, 73 receptions, almost 700 yards, 5 TDs. When you watch some of the games, as we were all on that ODU train, hoping that the Wolfpack could lead them to a better season. But whenever he did get the ball, the guy was electric. He was kind of Gronk-like in terms of, after the catch. He could plow people over. He could, leap. He could outrun some folks. He's 100-1 to be the first tight end taken. Also, a strange market inefficiency, 100-1 to be the second tight end taken. So you might as well go number 2, I think, in that case, because I think Michael Mayer from Notre Dame basically has that locked up. In terms of where he's projected now, this is why it's a little bit of a gutsy prediction by me. It's basically 4th round across the board, CBS, The Athletic. There's a lot of teams that have tight end needs. Chief among them, in my opinion. Can you imagine him with Joe Burrow in that Bengals offense? I think they need somebody who's able to stretch the middle of the field a little bit. The Lions traded TJ Hawkinson away to Minnesota, which I think long-term roster building was a great move by the Lions, but they need to replace him with a real stud. Packers as well. Chargers, Everett is pretty old. Dolphins, Jasicki ends up walking in free agency. Speaking of Jasicki, Kuntz was a Penn State kid, and I think that is an indication of where he was viewed from a scouting perspective right out of high school. Like, Penn State is one of the best tight end programs in the country, and they viewed him as the next great one to step in. He ends up transferring and has that one breakout year for the Monarchs. I love this guy. I think he's going to be a really good NFL player. I can't speak to his overall, run blocking, because it was a lot of shotgun for ODU. It's going to be a little bit different in the NFL as an inline blocker. If he can just be a mediocre blocker at his size, which I imagine you'd have to be with his length, his wingspan, everything else, I think this guy has a potential to be a Pro Bowl tight end. So does a team fall in love with him in the 3rd round? I'm at least going to make that bet.
First of all, the Packers are taking Dalton Kincaid in the 1st round, so unfortunately, we won't be there to take Kuntz. But you mentioned it, and I was going to bring this up too. That's, to me, the most important thing I look for in these G5 guys, because sometimes you worry about the knock on them being like, they played lesser competition, so they just look good, or you have they weren't very good and then had one big breakout year or grew a ton or something like that. You mentioned it, Kuntz. He was a 4-star recruit. He was the number 4 tight end in his class. He went to Penn State and played. He was on the Penn State roster for 3 years. The biggest thing with him was just, you mentioned it. It's basically become tight end you. He was behind Gesicki, or I think he was behind. No, he was behind Fryermuth at first.
Yeah.
And then, Brenton Strange, who is also going to get drafted, Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren. I'm a Penn State fan. Like, Penn State has a ton of tight ends, and we just rotate them, and they're all sick. We look how many tight ends Penn State, Gesicki, Jesse James. We've just been pumping out tight ends into the NFL, and so it's not like he wasn't good. I mean, he had offers from Alabama, LSU, Michigan, Notre Dame, Ohio State, USC. All wanted him to play, and he couldn't crack the Penn State rotations because we had so many guys. Brent Saints probably gets drafted before him, so it's not like a huge upset. And when Ricky Ronnie was his tight ends coach and offensive coordinator leaves, the first thing Ricky Ronnie does is say, "You're coming with me because you're a freak." So that, to me, kind of alleviates all the worry about the G5 and the lesser competition. It's like Ricky Ronnie watched this dude in practice going up against, Micah Parsons, and then these Jair Shorter and Jaquan Brisker and all these corners we've been putting out, Joey Porter Jr. And he's like, "I want you on my team. That's the first thing I'm doing is bringing you with me." So I agree. It's kind of a hard. There's a ton of tight ends this year, so it's hard to project him. But he's a guy that I definitely would love to have on my team. If the Packers didn't take Kincaid, I would definitely take him in the 3rd. He's also a guy that might be a good look to kind of. I mean, tight ends are so hard, especially early, but rookie dynasty. You kind of look at the Isaiah Likely kind of, model, and how people expect big things out of him. You kind of take Zach Kuntz and store him if he ends up in a good spot. He probably doesn't do anything his first 1 or 2 years, but with that size and speed, he's a guy I'd want on my bench, just in case.
All right, let's close that with some defensive love. Who's your favorite defensive player potentially in that round 2, round 3, round 4 window?
Yeah, like I said, I don't know that any go in the top 2, 3 rounds, but if I had to bet one of them, I know Andre Carter is getting a lot of love. I'm sure you'll touch on him. To me, the best G5 defensive player in this draft is Dorian Williams. He's the guy. The more I kind of rewatch Tulane games for him and Spears and stuff, he's everywhere. He does everything. Carter's good at kind of pass rushing, and I'm sure we'll talk on him after this, but Dorian Williams does everything. The dude had 131 tackles last season, 8.5 tackles for a loss, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 interceptions. He ran a 4.49 40, so he's crazy athletic for like a middle-ish, inside linebacker. He's Tulane runs that weird 4-2-5 defense, so he's kind of alone in the middle. They have the pass rushers, the secondary, and then he's basically alone in the middle and has to kind of do everything. He does both a lot. He does both very well. He's great at reading the ball. He has really, really good instincts, with his eyes. A little undersized, which again is kind of why he's in this 3-4, range. Um, but he does everything for them. You watch the USC game, he was their defensive MVP. He had 17 tackles against one of the best offenses in the country. He was everywhere on that. Every time USC needed a first down, he went flying and speared dude out of bounds to keep him at, to 7 yards instead of 10. So he's not the biggest guy, but I just think his versatility as a guy who, if they run the ball, you can trust him to come up and make the tackle. If they throw the ball, you can trust him in coverage. He's really good at, I think he's really good in coverage. I think he's super underrated in that aspect. So we saw how good that Tulane defense was, and he was everything for them. So I think he's got the motor and the juice to be really successful at the NFL level. So to me, Dorian Williams would be my first G5 defender off the board.
I think that's a good pick. I don't necessarily believe that my pick will be the first G5 defender off the board, but I'm going to really get interested in looking at live numbers for him at the end of the third, beginning of the fourth. It's Nick Hampton from App State. The Fun Belt has produced a lot of great defenders over the last 10 years. And not only was he super productive, but you look at the apples to apples comparison. They played North Carolina, they played A&M at the beginning of the season. He had 3 tackles for loss in those 2 games, a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. When you pair that with his overall production, the last 2 years, 27 tackles for loss, and the fact that you want to have as many options on the table as possible when you're looking purely at when this player is going to go. If you can get a number, does he go in the next 10 picks, something like that? You could argue that 25 of 32 NFL teams could use another edge rusher. It's just one of those positions where your room can never be deep enough. Like the talk on the Eagles going into the Super Bowl was not just that they had this game changer JJ Watt kind of pass rusher. It was that they came in waves, that they had 3 and 4 guys that they could rotate in on that edge, keeping people fresh. And the NFL, where the passing games are so sophisticated and the high-end quarterback play is so good, you want to drop 6 guys the majority of the time. So you want to get to the quarterback with 4 and 5 rushers. And to do that, you have to get some real dudes up front. I love Hampton. I thought he was fantastic throughout the entire season. Watched a lot of App State football as we covered the Sun Belt as closely as any G5 conference. I think, his measurables as well, 6'2", 236 pounds. He ran a 4.58 40-yard dash. So to me, I think he checks all the boxes. It's just a question of, is there a run on edge rushers? Does somebody, go a little bit early and kind of start that domino train of these players coming off the board in the second and third round? And if that's the case, I think he could be the 5th or 6th guy at that position. And it's a position of need for every team in the NFL. What are your thoughts on maybe reaching a little bit, but absolutely needing somebody to be in a pass rusher rotation?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought him up because I was actually going to touch on him as my counterpoint. I hate, ending the show on a negative note, and especially when you're shitting on the United States Army. I don't get the Andre Carter love at all. When when he got, it's great that he was able to kind of, I don't even remember what happened. He postponed his service basically. There's all that drama that initially he was gonna have to fulfill his service duties. And every article was like first round projected, it's like, what are you talking about first round? He'll be lucky if he goes in the first 4 rounds.
Yeah, I think his postseason, the draft process, the Senior Bowl, I think just everything, nothing was catastrophic, but
He
everything
is
was like a little bit downhill. And also, we talk about this with offensive players, where it's like, oh, the guy got 120 targets, so no kidding, he caught 100 passes. The way that they used him defensively, they're trying to put him in the highest volume production spots on the field defensively all the time. So he did have an incredible season 2 years ago from a tackles for loss perspective, but how much of that was scheme versus how much was that him being like a Will Anderson type? They're not in the same class. And I think that there was a time when people kind of talked about him in that top 20 range. And I just don't think it's justified based on how he's going to match up against NFL talent.
Yeah, like you said, it was scheme, and also, you mentioned we're talking about he had 15 and a half sacks in 2020 in 2021. He had 3.5 last year because teams just blocked him. He is he's super long. He's 6'7". He is explosive, but he weighs 250 pounds. And to be 250 at 6'7" is bananas. This dude is an absolute twig. And he got bullied at the Senior Bowl. He got pushed around. He was obviously outmatched and pushed around. And you even saw it, during the season. He's not very good with his hands at the point of attack. He's not good at shedding blocks. He's just long and bendy. So basically, if he can get a free rush off the edge and the tight end forgets to block him and he gets a free run at the quarterback, he's fast, so he gets there every time. But it's like if a tackle gets his hands on him, he's cooked. So, like I said, he's falling down the draft boards after his Senior Bowl and some of his testing because he's so skinny. I don't think he has a shot to see the field as a rookie. Probably even he needs like 2 or 3 years to just live in a weight room and bulk up. I do think he has upside, so I think he will be in kind of the fourth. Maybe he gets lucky and goes in the fourth. Probably more likely fourth or fifth round. He needs to live in the weight room. What was that? Who the NFLPA survey that came out? Who were like the top teams in the weight room? It was like the Vikings and the Dolphins, I think. If he ends up in the Dolphins and can live in that A+ rated weight room, he could have a solid career. If he ends up in Baltimore or Arizona, his NFL career is over. And thank you for your service, because he's going to be shipped off to the military real soon because he needs to get big. He is just, I don't get it. I saw his name a ton in like the first round. It's like, what are you talking about? So to me, I was going to bring him, your guy, up as well. I think, I'd much rather take him if you're going to go edge. But if you're going to go edge, I'd rather go with Nick Hampton. If you're going to go defense, then like I said, I'm a big fan of Williams.
Well, hopefully we've whetted your appetite with some of this talk at the top of the draft. Not quite the first round, not even really the second round in a lot of these picks. But the draft is going to be chock full of former G5 heroes in day 3, which is what we're going to get into in our next podcast, which is going to drop later this week. So please keep an eye on that on your podcast feeds. We'll be able to get into some of those players that are really the lifeblood of any championship run on the fantasy side. You got to get those running backs who end up, in a timeshare, or in some cases, the Alfred Morrises of the world, where everything comes together, and those 5th and 6th round skill position players.
Boy, a little teaser. I already know my guy. If my brother and cousin who are in my dynasty league, they usually listen to the pod, I'm not letting them listen to the next one, because I'm telling you, I got a guy circled big time that the second, I don't think he'll get drafted in, your dynasty rookie drafts. They're usually 2-3 rounds. He probably doesn't go. The second the draft ends, I'm picking him up as a free agent, and we'll tease him. We'll talk about him next week or next episode.
For Mike Iannello, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by BetMGM. Our G5 deep dive now in the books for our first draft episode. Be sure to listen back in later this week as we get into those deep cuts, sleepers only, rounds 4 through 7. No stone left unturned by the two of us. So looking forward to giving it to you guys. Take care.